So the producer in commercials is actually, and music videos, is intrinsically involved from the script writing process all the way through to the end of post-production to delivering the whole job. So you do get a really good grounding in learning all of the skills that you need to, and more probably, in terms of doing the post-production side as well, which many line producers don't ever really touch on in film and TV. So I've been quite lucky from that point of view in having that sort of like breadth of experience to sort of like to help me move and transition to films quite sort of quickly. But yeah, in terms of the skills, I mean, it's basically managing admin, managing people from a logistic point of view, working out, to be able to come up with sort of creative solutions to logistic problems, which can be anything from makeup to locations to post-production to getting the right effect on screen. And generally, you know, the short form projects are they're nowhere near as taxing in terms of the admin side, and they're actually the sort of getting your head around sort of working out how to create a project, you know, because it's much shorter, so it's it is easier from that point of view. However, the aspirations creatively of commercials and music videos tend to be really right up there. No matter what the budget is, it's always pushing the budget far harder than a film or TV show generally does. And also you're under the pressure of you're under the pressure of trying to make a profit on it for the production company as well, because generally as a producer, that's the way you make them employ you again, is by not only delivering the job but not going over budget and preferably making a profit. So so I guess it combines a lot of the skills of sort of creative but with business acumen that you kind of learn along the way. And definitely managing people and managing the project to get the right results. It differs as early as possible, really, is the ideal from a line producing point of view, because then you can influence, not necessarily control, but certainly influence the way we approach sort of using the budget that they think they're going to have for the project. I mean, often a line producer can be brought in at the very early stages in sort of development, really, to do an initial budget, to give the producer and the director a sort of sense of what they're looking at, what they've written is going to cost. But if that's not the case, then you're brought on later on in the process, then you have to essentially work with the budget that was done in the development stage. Which is the challenge of line producing, really, because you're working to somebody else's budget. You can tweak and you can pull and push it in a little bit, but generally you have to work with what you're given. The difference with commercials and with going from short form to long form is that generally the long form budgets are more realistic. It is done from a business perspective, from an actual realistic business perspective, as opposed to a slightly aspirational, let's hope we can do it for that, which is sometimes what happens in short form. But yeah, I mean, essentially the short answer is as early as possible in the process is ideal. Often some key HODs can be sort of like attached as I'm coming on board. But you know, more often than not, we still need to find pretty much every HOD after I've been hired, and certainly I decide who we bring in the production team completely. But with HODs, generally the director or the producer has got people ideally they want to work with, so we go through a short list of people. It's a combination of getting the balance between who we want, who's on our list of who we want, and who's actually available. And the closer we get to the date that they're supposed to start, the more of a race against time it becomes. It's really key to get to, because it's all about the combination of people and sort of getting that right blend between people and, you know, getting the right experience on a job. So you have to spend the requisite amount of time finding those people. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than you want it to, but it is about managing people and managing, I suppose it's making them feel, sort of recognizing their worth, and making them know and making them realize that we recognize their worth, trying not to be unrealistic in our requests of what needs to be done. but it's like I said just now, in terms of looking for people, it's about trying to get that right blend. And so it is, even though it's not a full-time job that you're employing somebody for, you still have to give it the same weight as you would do if it was a full-time job, because it's all about the balance of it's all about the blend of people working together, really. So you have to get that right blend. And in terms of getting the best out of them, further than that, it is, I don't know, you kind of, I mean, that's the one thing about the film industry, is that people are, especially compared to commercials actually, is that people are much more self-sufficient, in the sense they realize the responsibility given on them, and they kind of like embrace that, and they take it on board, and they do that. I've never really come across anybody not doing the best job they possibly can, so far anyway, and hopefully I don't. But yeah, it's about showing worth, and about just making sure they feel appreciated, and that they're getting enough out of the job themselves. I wouldn't say conflict exactly. There's always a little bit of production against everybody else, which is really silly, because production makes everything happen for everybody else. So there is always it's definitely, it's not a rivalry, or it's not sort of clashes or anything like that. It's purely just a slight distrust. It's like production's like the government in a way. That's how crews kind of like treat them to an extent. But like I said, as long as, you know, if you've got the right people working with you in production, and they give the right vibes off to everybody else, as it were, that, you know, generally the mood is pretty convivial and collaborative. Yeah, we're quite lucky in that, from that basis. I guess scheduling, where things don't go quite right on one day, and we have to try and add that into another day. So that happens quite regularly, not due to anybody's fault, just due to circumstance. It's main, yeah, I'd say mainly on long form things. The problems are generally logistic. Because you have that much more planning time, and you have that much more people involved at a high level, that everything is planned within each department really quite in a very detailed way, that you perhaps don't have the same attention to detail, or definitely not the same time to prep in short form. Short form, generally the problems tend to be more creative, like finding the right creative way that's still working within budget to produce the results we wanted to on the commercial I was doing last year, which was by far more effort was spent actually trying to work out the creative result, as opposed to trying to then logistically how to do it, which was relatively straightforward. Just to ask because obviously we see, you know, I've got the script in front of me, so further than that, it's just to ask, you know, if there's a couple of scenes in there that I think, oh right, that could be done in any number of ways. Let's look at how you kind of envisage it. You have that kind of conversation. Obviously, if there's something in there which immediately strikes you as being, wow, that's really big, and that does not reflect in the budget figure that they're aiming at, then obviously you bring that up straight away. But I try not to have any conversations with the director that's in the least bit sort of negative at that stage. Well, I try not to have negative conversations with them at any point, but certainly not at that stage. And you just kind of, if there is an issue, then you kind of like try and ease them into it relatively slowly, without it being kind of like, no, you cannot do that. That's completely out of the question. It's all about finding solutions. As long as you come with a positive on top of any negative, then it's generally all right. Again, it's collaboration and talking, really, because it's about offering up alternatives or options on any one thing that's not working. I mean, it's more often if something becomes unavailable or becomes very scarce, and so therefore the price increases or something like that. It's rare to get into production and then for something to go, oh shit, no, that's going to cost an awful lot more money than we thought it was going to. It's quite rare for that to happen, but circumstances do change, and you just have to try and sort of source options before saying, no, we're not able to do that. It's always about options. It's always about trying to be positive as well as negative. Purely from experience, really. Even if you haven't shot that kind of scene before, even if I haven't shot that kind of scene before, I would have filmed something relatively similar or similar in some way to it. And so I'll use that experience and what we used to create that as a basis. I'll discuss that with the director and the producer, see if that's what they had in mind for that specific scene. And if not, then we'll tweak it. If it is, then great. I think in short form, you as a producer, you definitely have a big appreciation of the creative side. And I mean, certainly, I mean, I've done a little bit of writing as well in short form. I did a Cheerios sponsorship campaign, which I wrote all the script for, which I was also producing about 5 or 6 years ago, which was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. And that did put me in a completely different position on set, because I was being asked by the director who I was working with sort of questions about the creative, having sort of written the ideas. But then in the back of my head going, what? And I can't be saying that. That's ridiculous, because that's going to cost way too much money to do that. So it's a combination basically. And I think in films and drama, you have to have a creative appreciation, but not necessarily be creatively driven as a line producer. You definitely have to have a really good sense of money and budget and business and managing to do the job successfully. And if you have a creative aspiration or understanding as well, then it's a bonus. I think from my perspective, because I've done so much short form, then I try to bring as much of that creative appreciation into the way that I approach production in long form as well. But it's not always wanted, but when it is, it's great. In the last year, it's been obviously quite a strange year, and it's been very up and down for people. I was actually working on quite a large commercial when the pandemic happened, when we went into lockdown. So it really was quite a technical job, and it took a lot of working out the best way of doing it that was doable for the budget, and that was doable in the time that we had to do it. But we did then spend 2 months after in lockdown in post-production trying to do everything remotely, which was, I mean, now things are working much more easily remotely. At the time, this was very much trial and error, and it really was as much error as success, really. But so that's what I was doing at the time of the pandemic. Since then, I've worked on a little comedy drama called The Show, which was independently funded. So it wasn't funded by a broadcaster. So they're in the process of selling it to broadcasters at the moment. And that was sort of partly shot in America, partly shot here. I did all the stuff that was shot here, but I sort of co-produced I line produced or co-produced the whole thing. And that was great. That was fine. It was relatively small scale in its aspiration, and we shot at the right time of COVID in terms of being the September, October being sort of the least stressful time of the pandemic. So that was fine. And I have just started working on Greg Davis's new comedy show for the BBC, which is called The Cleaner, which has got a very stellar cast of co-stars. And that starts shooting end of April. Well, apart from the first one of trying to do post-production remotely, where nobody had a clue what they were doing, there's far too many people involved, all in different places, and all with strong opinions, and it just took way longer than it should have. I think the lesson has been learned from that, and that far less is done completely remote, like it was back then. But that was the early stages of the lockdown. But in terms of shooting the show, which we did back in September and October, we were quite lucky that we had a really small cast, and so we kept the crew as small as possible to reflect that, and also because we knew that the smaller the crew is, the less difficult it is to manage in a COVID situation. We were also in quite big locations, so we were quite lucky. On the main location we had was Sadler's Wells Theatre, which is a big modern theatre. So it was who had their own relatively tight COVID protocols, but that gave us the framework within which we worked. So that it was fine. Just doing the prep for the job that I'm doing at the moment. I've actually just had an hour and 45 minute Zoom meeting with the COVID supervisor we're probably going to use. And yeah, it is. I mean, it's challenging, and I think you have to work with the situation that's in front of you, which does change quite a lot sort of, you know, regularly, really. So hopefully now it's becoming easier, but certainly we intend to observe as many of the protocols as has been observed for the last sort of like six or 9 months or so as we can. Hopefully hopefully the pressure on people will be a little bit less. I've heard of some productions it's literally adding 20% to the budget. I mean, which is seems, I mean, that can only be when the cast is really quite big and at a very high level, and the crew is very big, and a number of HODs are sort of having to be tested on a daily basis, basically. Yeah, it can vary between. I mean, I think that's the maximum, but certainly, I mean, ours is around about 10%. The main one would be to allow a little bit more time than you would normally use, because if you're wanting real-time feedback like you would get normally when people are in the suite with you, then it's going to be pretty tricky to get that. But if you can allow a bit more time, then that will make things a bit easier for you.